emails pertaining to that and asking if I do record, and I do typically record, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Also, these show up on the Metro Master Gardeners YouTube channel. So I know some people have emailed me for the link, and I'm happy to provide that. Also, you can follow us on there and get, hang on a second, I'm letting a few more people in here. You can follow me on the Metro Master Gardeners YouTube channel, and if there are any recordings of presentations that have been given, you can find them there. All right, so let's do a screen share. All right. So fall vegetable gardening. Hang on a second. There. All right. Sorry. Many moving bits here to handle. All right. So selecting a garden site. There are some really important things that we all need to be aware of when it comes to selecting a site for our garden. And that goes for both a fall vegetable garden or a spring vegetable garden, pretty much across the board, knowing that, of course, you may have different sun availability during different times of the year. But regardless of whether it's a spring or a fall garden, you've got to have at least 6 hours of sunshine daily. That's a necessity. Most vegetable plants are going to be sun lovers, and fall vegetable gardens are, you know, no different than that. So you're going to want to avoid trees and hedges. Here in the lovely middle part of the state in Georgia, we have a lot of pine trees, and those obviously can cast a lot of shadows spring or summer. So make sure that you're placing your garden, whether it's a new one or an existing one, that the trees have grown up around, away from pine trees, so that you have plenty of sun. Same thing for hedges. I know some of us have planted hedges or have fences. Don't forget about a fence. Maybe because you have nosy neighbors and you don't want them to see your garden. So beware of those and how much shade they can cast on your garden. Consider convenience to house and your availability for water. So some of us are blessed that we have larger sites that we can put our garden on. Maybe we have 2 acres, maybe 5 acres. Some of us may just have a community bed garden, and that's perfectly fine. But the biggest thing is you've got to have water availability. And of course, you know, it's nice if you have a house nearby. Obviously, you don't have that every time, but the water is very important because sometimes fall is very dry, and so you're going to need to make sure that you're going to water that garden if Mother Nature isn't. And definitely in the summertime also, we get spotty thunderstorms, and so we might get blessed and get a lot of rain, or you may not get hardly any at all. So in that case, you definitely want to make sure that you have a source of water. Nobody wants to have to carry a bunch of buckets of water down from the house, or you know, some type of a water container in the back of their car, or the gator, or a golf cart, however you want to do it. That can get old really fast. And then soil selections. So you're going to want medium textured soils. And some of you may be scratching your head and going, well, Lisa, are you going to go into that a little bit more? Because I don't know what a medium textured soil is. And the good news is, yes, we are going to talk about soils. And in addition to the texture of the soil, we also want well drained, and those go hand in hand. Okay, so what kind of soil is best? So we have here our soil triangle, and you can see there's all sorts of stuff in there. And again, you're probably scratching your head going, what in the world are you showing me? This is kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of different types of soils. And sorry, letting a few more people in. Please mute yourself if I've just let you in. So this is a soil triangle. And with a soil triangle, there is, believe it or not, the perfect combination of soils. So what would that be? Well, I just circled it for you. So you're going to want a sandy clay loam soil. So it's about the magic recipe is about 30%, 33% of each. So a sandy soil, and I'll show you, I think I've got some, maybe not, we'll see that you may just have to look at the picture here. A sandy soil, sand is going to have a big coarse particle. It's going to be easy for it to drain, and that's definitely something that we need. Clay is a very small particle. Most of us would know that if we have heavy Georgia clay soils. When it gets really, really dry, rain just kind of bounces off of it and runs away. So we don't really like that. Clay is good, I guess, in moderation. If you mix it with other things here, like the loam is heavy and rich organic matter. And so when you mix in that 33% sand, which is kind of a coarse, easily drained particle, that clay, which is a very small particle that has a lot of ability to hold water, and then the loam or the organic matter, and you mix that all together, you end up with almost like a perfect mixture of what a garden soil should be. So that's what we see here, a sandy clay loam soil, which we unfortunately don't have a lot of here in Georgia naturally. We have to kind of amend that, but that's fine. That's easily remedied. Okay, pH and nutrient availability. So I'm not going to get all sciencey on you. Some of you may understand pH more than others, but basically you have, yeah, there we go. I thought I skipped one. Every time I'm admitting people in, it's causing my ability to advance through the slides to change a little bit. So I want to make sure I hit everything. So soils of Gwinnett County. So soil pH is the measurement of a soil's acidity. And we use pH for a lot of different things, but maybe if you can remember back to your high school science class, you remembered that 7 would be neutral on a pH scale. And then you have acidic, well, in this case, soils, but you have acids, which could go from 6.9 all the way down to 0. And then you have alkaline or basic type solutions, and those would be from 7.1, well, 7.9 up to 14. And so if you have a very strong acid or a very strong base, both of them are very corrosive, just in different natures. So plants have a preferred pH, and I'm talking this is going to be for most plants, not all, but most, and that's going to be somewhere around 6 to 6.5. You have some plants like azaleas and rhododendrons and blueberries that have a preference for more acidic soils, just like you have some plants that have a preference, like cherry trees, for more alkaline soils. And those tend to prefer maybe like 8, 8.5, whereas blueberries might be 5, 5.5. So there's a little bit of variance in Mother Nature, but generally speaking, most plants are going to be happiest in that 6 to 6.5 range. So pH and nutrient availability. So the interaction between pH, the nutrients that are in the soils, and their availability to plants is quite unique. And you can kind of see that here. I know this chart is a little difficult to comprehend, and that's perfectly fine. Sometimes I go cross-eyed looking at this stuff too. But what I want you to focus on is that up and down vertical bluish purple line that you see there. That is going to be roughly where plants are going to be happiest. So you can see those that already know, and again, I'll get to some of the nutrients that plants need, but these are most of the both macro and micronutrients that plants are going to need. So you have the top 3 or the big 3 macronutrients, nitrogen, which nitrogen helps with green shoots and things like that, phosphorus and potassium. Those will be helping with metabolism in plants, roots, moving nutrients around fruits and flowers and things like that. So the top 3 are the macronutrients are the ones you need the most of. And you can see their bioavailability is highest when that pH is right smack in that 6 to 6.5 range. And then as we move down, we see we've got micronutrients, calcium and magnesium, sulfur, iron and zinc, manganese, aluminum, copper, boron, and molybdenum. So you can kind of notice that sometimes you don't want too much bioavailability. You have iron and zinc, which tend to be pretty available the more acidic something gets, and manganese also. And that's actually okay because, like I said, this is a micronutrient and plants don't need them in as big a concentration as what they would be available at more acidic levels. So just to kind of, I guess, prove this point, you can see here, these are plants that have been grown at different pH levels or different soil pH levels. So you can see there, right smack in the middle is going to be 7.1. So that's basically considered neutral. The pH scale is logarithmic, so it's a pretty big jump between 6.6 and 7.6. So do keep that in mind. And you can see the difference between growing a plant in a pH, which would be fairly alkaline or basic, as 10 versus 5.3, which is something a blueberry would be quite happy about. But you can see here with this leafy green that neither side is very happy about it. And at 4.5, which is pretty acidic, nothing grew. So plants are pretty happy in that fairly narrow range. So how do we know? Well, one thing, if you were to call into the extension office and say, you know, my plants just aren't growing very well, what's going on? Well, the first thing we would do would be to ask you, when was the last time you sampled your soil? So sampling your soil is going to be the very first thing that you want to do if you're thinking about setting up a vegetable garden at your home. If you're in a community garden, no, they take care of that for you. So unless you've really heavily amended the bed that you're in, it's probably not necessary. But if you do have a vegetable garden at home or a new one or even an old one, we try to encourage folks to do this about every 3 years or so. That sampling your soil is a good idea to get a snapshot of what's going on out there. So soils are obviously the basis of just about everything that's green and growing. And if you have, as I've shown you here in the last couple slides, if you see that things are off a little bit and you know, all sorts of things, people would be shocked at some of the reasons we see why pH is off in the soil. You know, it really can make a difference, and we can fairly easily adjust pH if we know what's going on. So this is what we would recommend. So we have a brochure at the office that is digital or, you know, paper copy, and you can swing by and pick one up, or we can send it to you, and it explains how you're supposed to sample your soil. So you don't have to come in the office and get a soil bag. I'll show you one of those. Some of you probably already have done soil samples. If you haven't, then this is just kind of an intro. But we usually tell folks, no special trip needed. Just get yourself a Ziploc baggie, usually a gallon size, and you're going to take a clean shovel or trowel, and you can see that on the left-hand side, and a bucket that hasn't had any fertilizer or anything else in it. And you're going to go to random samples throughout the area that you're wanting to get an idea of. So here you can see there's a wooded area, vegetable garden, you've got lawns, you might have a low-lying area that's just seems kind of, you know, struggling. Maybe it holds water, that kind of thing. So you're going to go and take some random soil samples, and you're going to dig down through the turf. So you're going to slice through the turf if you've got grass, if you've got you know, detritus or whatever else on the surface, you're going to kind of push that aside. And then you're going to go down somewhere between 2 and 4 inches, and you're going to get a good shovel or scoop full of dirt. You're going to take that and put it in the bucket. And then you're just going to keep doing that for, you know, 4, 5, 6 different times until you've got maybe a half a bucket full of dirt. Then you're going to take it, and you're going to take that trowel, and you're going to swizzle that around, and you're going to mix it up really good. And then you're going to take about 2 cups of that and put it in your Ziploc baggie and label it. maybe we'll just say it's backyard or vegetable garden. And then you're going to bring that into the office. And then when you get to the office, you're going to get a soil bag, and we'll do that there. We'll get a soil bag, and then that's going to get sent off to our lab. I know I did talk about macro and micronutrients. Here's a little bit more about them. So I said the big three: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then there are the micronutrients: the calcium, sulfur, magnesium, chlorine, boron, manganese, nickel, iron, copper, zinc, and molybdenum. Those are also fairly important. And I threw this in here because a lot of you are in community gardens, not only the Harvest Gwinnett community gardens, but also maybe some of the other community ones for the different, like Swanee or Lanier, some of those. Sometimes you get a new bed, sometimes you get one with really good soil. But if you have maybe one that's had a lot of mulch added recently, that's still in the process of decomposing, you may not have all of these nutrients present. So it's okay to purchase, at least initially, when you're trying to really work your soil and get it into a condition that's perfect for plants, to go ahead and purchase a fertilizer that has micronutrient availability in it. And you can buy some of that. I've gotten some off of Amazon. I have raised beds myself. If you don't want to do that, then make sure that you're putting a half and half mixture of both mineral soil, and when I say mineral soil, I mean soil that you just dug straight out of the ground. It could be a clay mixture. You might add in some builder's sand or playground sand to add in that coarseness that will allow for water to drain through easier. And then, of course, the organic matter that you're getting from the compost. So you want a good conditioned soil, and that mineral soil is what is going to add in those micronutrients. And this is, again, NPK. So I know we've all seen this before. This is going to be your typical fertilizer bag. One we usually suggest is just a good old 10-10-10. So that's 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus. Oops, sorry, letting another person in. Phosphorus and potassium. And that means that as a dry weight, that is 10% dry weight of those particular minerals. And so that's going to add in those nutrients to your garden plants, vegetables, ornamentals, whichever you're talking about. It's just a good all-around fertilizer. All right, so don't guess soil test. And so probably should have moved this one back up there since I was on a roll and talking about soil testing. Sometimes I get ahead of myself, I apologize. And this is what you're gonna get when you do a soil test with us. So I mentioned you'll bring in your Ziploc baggie, and we'll transfer it over into the soil sample bag. We'll check a routine soil test. Here in Gwinnett, we charge $8. That's $6 for the sample and $2 for shipping. It takes about 10 days to get the results back, and that will be sent to you via email. So you'll get a really awesome little report, soil test report, that you can see a copy of here. And in that soil test report, you'll note that it's testing, not testing for nitrogen. Nitrogen is highly mobile in the environment. So you could take a snapshot of it, and then it's completely different by the time you get this test back. So they choose not to test for nitrogen, but they do test for phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and then pH. So you see here that you have two of the big three of the macronutrients, the phosphorus, the potassium, and then you have some of the micronutrients that are needed in larger amounts. And then also you have pH, which is, of course, very important for bioavailability. You also see here that they put a really nifty little bar in. And this, and you see here the red line, is right about where you want to be. So if you see that you brought your soil sample in and you have the bars that are going above this line, then that means you're okay. You don't need to add any more. You are fine for now. And so on this particular sample, you'll note phosphorus is just great. You don't need to add any more. You're pretty close to where the perfect amount would be. Potassium, you're just a smidge low, so you might want to consider adding some fertilizer in now or a little bit in the future for a little potassium. Calcium, magnesium, and zinc, you're good. But what we do know is that pH is a little on the low side. So that generally means that you're going to want to add some lime. So in this case, you'll notice up at the top that you have the crop, and if you can look over onto the soil bag, you see that we have the name, the address, the city, crop, and crop is going to be your home vegetable garden. What you're not seeing here is crop code, and I think this is an older bag. There should be a number code on this, so I'll have to make a note and change that. We do have number codes that coincide with whatever the item is that you're testing for. So I forget off the top of my head what home vegetable garden would be, but there is a number that coincides with that, just like there's one for grass, like Bermuda or Zoysia or something like that. So that would be your crop code, and then your sample number, and generally that would be like your vegetable garden or your back 40 or wildlife patch or whatever you want to call it. That's your sample. And then of course the county. So then you would look down at the recommendations on the soil sample, the soil test report, and you would see the recommended pH, and they are suggesting that you add some more lime to that. Then you would see down below that for medium feeders, and it gives some suggestions on crops like beans, beets, cantaloupes, cucumbers, things of that nature. It gives you a suggestion, and then heavy feeders for like the brassicas, broccolis, cabbage, that kind of thing. Potatoes, corns, it says increase the type of fertilizer by about 50%. And then light feeders like peas, recommendation is cut it in half. It also puts some suggestions for borax and let's see, for better feeding ability on sandy soils, half the recommended mixture before planting, and then again while it's half grown, and that's mostly because of the porosity of the soil. So you want to make sure that you're not flushing away all of your fertilizers. So that's why they're suggesting that you, in a sandy soil situation, that you don't put it all down at once. So generous in organic amendments. Can't say enough about adding in good compost. I do want to make note here, this has become a bigger and bigger problem going forward, is that a lot of folks like to go to maybe their local horse farm or someplace else that has animals and get well composted manure. And that is becoming more and more dangerous, and I'll tell you why. So there are some broadleaf weed killers out now that fall into a growth regulator category. Grazon is one of them, and it's a broadleaf weed killer. So the thing about that is that there's no withholding period for animals. So you can spray those broadleaf weeds in the pasture, and your animals can be out there while that's going on, and it's not going to affect them because it only affects the growth regulation of the weed, the broadleaf weed. And so the problem there is that we have a lot of garden plants that are super, super sensitive to the picloram, which is the herbicide or the pesticide that's in there. In the case of tomatoes, peppers, and a few other things, they are sensitive almost in the parts per billion with a B. That would mean we were all really super rich, but unfortunately not the case, because what happens is if you get a nice big load of compost, till that into your garden, and then we'll say this is summer, and then you plant in some tomato crops, about a month after you plant them, you're going to note that the top is going to start kind of distorting and curling in on itself. It's going to look really ugly. The other thing is it's not really going to produce any flowers or any fruit because, as I mentioned, it's a growth regulator. And people call, I can't tell you how many calls I get per summer about that. We're finally getting to the point where gardeners who do this a lot understand and know, and so they're purchasing their mulch from reputable sources. So a lot of folks have just stopped getting it from their local horse farm, and now they're just buying bagged up black cow or some types of garden soil, or they're getting it from in bulk from a reputable dealer who knows that the manure was not, there was no herbicide that was sprayed on that particular pasture, or it came from a dry lot, whichever. But you need to be real careful of that. So if you're a new gardener and you're thinking about how can I add in that awesome organic matter, just be very wary of that. And if you do get it from a local source, speak to that local source and ask them, what have you sprayed on your pasture? Because it passes through the manure. The animal will eat the grass, maybe sometimes the weeds. It passes through their system, doesn't harm the animal. But the thing is, the persistence of the herbicide in that manure is up to 2 years. So a lot of pesticides break down in UV light or in heat. And so if you put it in a composting situation, a lot of times it'll get hot enough, it can break down, not so with some of these newest class of pesticides. And so we're really recommending people ask a lot of questions if you're getting your manures locally, because we don't want to hear how unhappy you are when you planted 40 different tomato plants that you grew from seed, and now none of them are going to be viable. So just make a note of that, and be careful about where you're getting or sourcing your organic matter. Note that organic matter does break down in UV light. So it's good to mix it in with your soil, till it in well. And then a lot of times it also makes sense to use some type of a mulch over the top. Pine straw is a good one that, of course, will break down and give back to the soil itself, but it also helps protect the soil from, or the organic matter from UV radiation, which breaks it down. So that's why we're constantly adding in organic matter of some sort, because it does break down over time. So just be aware of that. All right. Only work in the garden with a tiller or a spade when soil moisture is right. So why would we do that? Well, you can see here in the picture, and that's soil compaction. So obviously with Georgia clay, it compacts very easily. And you can even get, heavy moistured soils will also compact very readily. And soil compaction is really difficult to fix. I think many of us have been, I guess, the unfortunate recipients of that, when maybe we drove our truck down to where the vegetable patch was and maybe ran over part of it, and then it dried, and then we had to use a pickaxe to try to bust through to get in there. I think we've all been there. I've unfortunately been guilty of doing that too. So soil compaction is a thing. We want to try to limit how much we're messing around with the soil when it's super wet, because then soil compaction can be a problem. And one easy thing is the hand test. So if you pick up a big wad of soil, I know that's not a very scientific way of talking about it, a big wad of soil. Take it and put it in your hand, and then just kind of squish it up. You shouldn't be able to squeeze any water out. If you're squeezing water out, it's too wet. If you can't squeeze, if you let it go and it crumbles again, it's too dry. So really, you should be able to kind of, get somewhere in between what you see here in these two pictures. You want it to kind of hold its shape, but not too much. All right, let's move on to planning the garden. And these are going to be some of the cool season crops. So we've kind of run through some really basic stuff on soils and pH and the basis of everything. So now we're ready to stick something in the ground. So as you can see here, we may not have, I guess, as many fun things to choose from as we would for a summer type garden, but there's still plenty to choose from. So we've got cabbage and carrots and kale, collards, lettuce, mustard, onions, English peas, radishes, spinach, beets, broccoli, cauliflower, Swiss chard, turnips, and Irish potatoes. So that's a lot of different stuff. And the nice thing about Georgia, and we maybe have some transplants on here, and that's great, welcome, is that Georgia has a relatively mild winter, which means that not only can you enjoy a summer garden, but you can also enjoy fall and winter garden, which is fantastic. So you can garden all year round if you would like, and harvest your own produce and can. A lot of folks like to do that and put it up for the winter or the summer. And it's a really easily and fun, enjoyable way to just kind of get out there and be one with nature. So a little trivia for you. How we modified the genetics of wild mustard for the domestic plants of today. So this, you can go and say this randomly to one of your friends or family members, and they'll probably scratch their head and go, where did they get that weird factoid? So you can just kind of point them at Extension and say, hey, we're full of it over here. But cabbage, you can see here you have the Brassica, Oleracea, and you have a selection for terminal buds. Terminal buds will be the bud at the very end of the stem, and that would be for cabbage. And then lateral buds, you have Brussels sprouts, and then a selection for the stem would be kohlrabi, and then a selection for leaves would be kale. Selection for stems and flowers would be broccoli, and a selection for flower clusters would be cauliflower. So from one little wild plant, we have a whole bunch, 6 different types of domestic plants. So that's kind of an interesting little trivia tidbit. And next we'll move on to leafy greens. So this will be all the good stuff that you see here. And we have lettuce, and there's a lot of different types of lettuce. So I didn't put all the different pictures on here, but you have like iceberg and Napa and butter and romaine, radicchio, red leaf, all sorts of different lettuces. And you can pick these dudes until the cows come home, and you will still have more lettuce as long as you keep them away from the deer. Deer really like lettuce. So that is an aside. If you are starting a new garden, make sure that you have a way to protect it from deer. If you have questions about that, you're certainly welcome to call us at Extension. We can walk you through some ways to deer-proof your garden. But generally it involves, you'll have to have some type of a fence. Just know that. We do have a lot of suburban deer here, and they can be a problem. Collards. So around here in the South, collards are a big thing. And you'll get those usually around Christmas time, New Year's, and obviously, the traditions. They're, prepared correctly, they are pretty tasty. So prepared incorrectly, they can be pretty bitter. So get a good recipe, but they're very popular around here. Mustard greens, again, maybe not quite as popular as some of the other types of greens, can be a little spicy, but there definitely have their fans out there. Kale. We use every year we have in the school system with Georgia Organics, they'll pick a plant of the year, and kale was one of those. And so my colleague Kim Fritz had to plant an awful lot of kale one year for that project. So she's very accomplished at growing kale. There's a lot of schools in Gwinnett County. And Siberian kale. Spinach. This is a favorite of a lot of people. The beauty of all of these is you can cut them and you can keep harvesting them. As long as you water them and keep them happy, they will keep growing back new greens. So you don't need to pull them out. When you want to harvest, you just go out with a knife or scissors and you snip away and bring them back in. And then before you know it, you've got another crop, and you can go down there and harvest all winter long, which is kind of nice. Spinach is great in a big variety of recipes. So I typically will grow some in my garden, and we really enjoy it. And cabbage. So this is just a traditional cabbage. You'll get that around here. Some people grow it. It does tend to get really buggy. You get a lot of cabbage loopers and some other types of caterpillars that can prey on it. I don't really grow cabbage, but I do know quite a few people that do grow it, and you can find it. A lot of folks who go up to the farmers markets up in North Georgia, and they grow a lot of it up there. So cabbage is a good. There's lots of good recipes for that, and you can see it can grow rather large. This one is a lot of times I think some of these biggest ones will come from up north, but yeah, this is quite a huge cabbage. Bok choy, and there's lots of good things you can do with bok choy, good recipes for that. Brussels sprouts, I know there's a lot of folks on the fence with these. Some people swear they're disgusting little cabbages, the cabbage wannabes, but if you've ever gotten some bacon and balsamic and had a bacon wrapped Brussels sprout glazed in balsamic garlic, I guess it's just balsamic garlic, and then put in the oven and allowed to kind of crisp up, it's good. So I suggest you look for that recipe. It's very tasty. English peas. So these would be harvested in probably like February, March, something like that. You know, you can lose them if it gets super cold and you'll get a hard freeze, but yeah, these are really good in salads. Broccoli, you can usually get several cuttings off of this. It's quite prolific. And cauliflower. So cauliflower is pretty yummy. I enjoy it, and I know a lot of folks like to use this in keto diets. You can grate it up and use it as a rice substitute, or you can make a flour substitute for pizza crust. And here's another little trivia tidbit. Did you know that blanching is a process of denying light to certain plants that make them more tender and less bitter? So you can see here they've taken a cauliflower head and they've tied up all of the leaves over the top of it to keep it from the sunlight. So little trivia tidbit. Swiss chard. So you can get some rainbow colors here. Here you see some red, but it comes in purples and fuchsia and yellow, and it's really pretty actually. And deer really like this as well. So just make sure that if you're growing Swiss chard, which is similar to spinach, I would guess, you can use it the same way you would use spinach, that you're covering it up and keeping it safe from the deer. Arugula. Again, something that you're going to put in a leafy green salad along with the butter lettuce and maybe the romaine, that kind of thing. You would have some arugula in there, and you can cut this and it will grow back. And then we'll move on to root crops. So you see here a couple different selections, beets and some turnips. So first we have turnips, and there are a lot of different varieties out there. You can grow them for the root section, which if you cut them off, cut the greens off and peel the skin and root off, cut them up and then just munch on them. They're actually pretty tasty. I like to eat them that way. You can cook them, although you'll find some of the other root vegetables will be used more for cooking purposes. They do also have varieties that give you the greens, because turnip greens are a big thing, especially if you're from out of the area. Turnip greens along with the collards, those have a definite place in the South. And so sometimes you can purchase seed that won't really give you much of anything on the root section, but all of the energy goes into growing greens on the top. Beets. So beets, roasted beets, are actually really, really tasty. So I like a good roasted root vegetable medley. So you can get some turnips and some beets, maybe some carrots, and you can kind of toss them with some garlic and olive oil and put them in the oven, and they are really, really good once they get nice and tender. And you can enjoy that with pork or anything else, and it means a lot more when the fact that it's coming from your own garden. So definitely enjoy your root vegetables and your beets. They have different types of beets, different colors. There's some orange beets and your regular red beets. So just kind of look around for those different varieties. And carrots, long gone from just having orange carrots. Now we have orange and red and yellow. these are kind of fun. So you see the purplish carrots on the right. If you cut into those, they'll have a yellow center. My son really enjoys having these types of carrots. They're kind of fun to eat. No more difficult to grow than just the standard orange ones. And radishes. So there are a lot of different types of radishes. Some people don't like them. They say they're a little too spicy, and that's probably because they're a little older than they should be. So just a note here, you can see radishes mature pretty quickly compared to other crops. So when you plant them, you know, of course, you're going to go out there and thin them so that you end up with a row that looks very similar to what you have here. It only takes about 28 days, so roughly a month from planting to harvest. That's pretty quick. And don't forget, you have to thin in there if you want to harvest some that actually develop a well-formed bulb on the root. And of course, once mature, they'll age rapidly. So the best thing to do if you like radishes, and these are really fun to just pop in your mouth and chew, if you get them when they're young enough, they're not going to be real hot. They'll just be kind of a mild flavor. You want to plant in succession. We call that succession planting. So every 10 days or so, you go out and you plant another row. And then when you have some that are, you know, haven't formed the root on there, or maybe you're too old, and you just pull those up. And if you want to go back and put some more in, you can do that. And then you have kind of a little subset, or the trophy radishes. And so if you have any deer hunters out here, you might note that you can buy the daikon or the trophy radishes, and those are planted for deer forage. Rutabagas. So rutabagas are often roasted and then mashed. So sometimes they're a substitute for mashed potatoes, just like cauliflower is. Sometimes people will mash the cauliflower and they'll eat that. In keto diets, rutabaga is about the same. You can mash that and have that as a substitute for mashed potatoes. It's got a little bit of a twang to it. A little different than potatoes, which can be very mild and don't have a ton of flavor. And sometimes you can mix them with potatoes for just a little bit of extra flavor that's a little different. So that's just another thing to throw out there that you might think about growing and adding into your dinner table rotation. Kohlrabies. So the typical ones that you'll find are going to be the purple and the green. And so it looks like it should grow underground, but it actually doesn't. It's kind of reversed. So where your beet or your radish or your rutabaga or your turnip grows under the soil, and you have just that little top of the bulb that kind of pokes out the top, instead, kohlrabies, the top part grows entirely out of the soil, and you just have the root down below. So that bulb that you see is actually growing above the soil. And you can kind of keep an eye on it and know when you should or shouldn't harvest based on the size. But just like with turnips and rutabagas, the smaller the bulb, the more tender it's going to be. So you don't want to leave it there too long or it'll get woody. And here, thinning is very important also, just as it is with turnips and rutabagas. You want to make sure that you leave a good bit of space in between each of the plants so that it doesn't have too much competition for nutrients and water and will grow to a decent size. Onions. So we got another little trivia. Did you know that onions generally grow at or near the surface of the ground? And onions that are direct seeded will have more of their bulb exposed as compared to those that were transplanted from sets or bulblets. So just something interesting if you ever looked at your garden and kind of wondered, why is that? Onions planted in the fall and grown over the winter often make the largest. So that's how Vidalia onions are grown, or the sweet onions that we all like and look for in the stores. And they can tolerate a good bit of cold weather and even some freezing weather. And that they also come in yellow, white, or red varieties so that you can plant them either from seeds or from sets. And garlic. So some of us, I've got some garlic out there. I swear that garden grown garlic is way better than what you can get in the store, but that's just me. But it is fun to kind of grow that. You can get some of that big elephant garlic And not only does it make some pretty flowers, but then you also have garlic for your pantry. Okay, how to plant seeds and transplants. So planting depth. So when you get a package of seeds, so we're going to just kind of start with seeds here, and you flip over the back of the package and you look at it, this is kind of what you're going to see. Different variations depending on the seed company, but you're going to see the light, the row spacing, the plant spacing, the planting depth, the days to germination, and the plant height. You're going to also get some very basic information about what it is that you're planting. Like in this case, it's a carrot, and it'll tell you harvest is 55 days and a packet plant's about 40 foot. So in this case, carrots like full sun. You want to row space about 12 inches. You want to space between plants about 2 inches. So remember when I said thinning, that's kind of important. The seeds are so tiny. So, just make a note there that you're going to have to come back after you plant them and they start emerging, that you're going to have to do some maintenance. And I know it hurts when you have to thin those babies out, but you will thank me later when you're able to actually harvest full-size plant or full-size vegetables. Planting depth and days to germination. So here you're going to take a hoe and you're going to kind of chop up that soil, and remember, as much as you've got organic matter in there, that will be easier to do. You're going to kind of scratch the soil the surface of the soil a little bit. And you can buy fancy little doodads that'll allow you to put a specific number of seeds in the ground. But, I put it in the palm of my hand and just kind of sprinkle it out, and it does well too. So you're going to cover the seed well and then tamp it down with that tool to kind of tamp them into the dirt. So seeds like carrots or some of the really small seed, that's all you really need to do. You don't have to really cover it so much as maybe just lightly take that spade and kind of cover over the top. The next time you get a good rain or you water it from the garden hose, it'll kind of compact that soil just a little bit. You'll maybe have just a light covering over the top. You really don't need to tamp it down too much, unless you notice that. It'll be more with bigger seed like bean seeds or something if you're doing that in the summertime, that it's being uncovered from watering and you want it to be covered with the soil. And again, the days to germination, so you'll watch, so somewhere after about 2 weeks, depending a lot on temperatures. So we'll start thinking about putting our seeds in the ground here in early mid-September. And so it should be maybe by the end of September that you would notice things starting to come up, unless of course we have a really fast, cold fall. And we don't normally get that. Usually we're kind of a nice, prolonged, cooling off type of fall with occasional heat waves that pop through. I can remember some where we had almost 100-degree days. So of course, seeds will germinate really quick if you're watering them in temperatures like that. Water the seed bed with a gentle spray. You don't want to come through and slosh water all over it, because that'll not only wash your soil, but your seeds away. So just make sure it's a nice gentle sprinkle over the top of it. And you want to wet the seed bed a couple times a day if you can. If it's rained, probably not that big of a deal. Just make sure that it's not a super hard rain. It hasn't washed all your seeds away. If you're on an area that's not very level, if you're in a level area, it's probably not that big of a deal, but just kind of make sure that it stays damp until it starts to germinate. Transplanting seedlings. So, some people are really into growing their own plants from seed, and they have the grow lights and they have everything to do that. And more power to you. I often wish I had the patience and the desire to do that. I just don't have the time to do that. So I find myself picking and choosing what I want to grow, and I often will just buy transplant sized plants that have, Bonnie Seed has kindly already grown for me, or I'll buy them locally from some local growers. So you'll see there's some transplants that are often used instead of seed, and those include cabbage plants, broccolis, tomatoes, and peppers. For instance, for tomatoes, if you're going to grow those in the summertime, you often would want to start your seed in January or February so that they would be sizable by the time you want to stick them in the ground in April. And that requires an awful lot of preparation, and I just don't have the time now. But there is a lot of satisfaction from doing that yourself, and we'll probably be offering a series on how to do that, how to start seeds, and how to kind of go forward from there so that you're confident in doing that. And it is totally something that anybody can do. It really, don't be intimidated by that. Just for me, sometimes the easier route is the best route. So transplants are easiest to establish and will produce earlier crops than direct seeded crops. As I said, you have to start your tomatoes in January-ish in order to get them about the same size as you could purchase a transplant. And, to me, there are some reasons why you would want to do all your seeds yourself. Sometimes disease is an issue, but generally speaking, if you're buying from a reputable source, it won't be that big of an issue. Bare root transplants are available, however, not seen as much anymore. And soilless mixtures that you would get from a nursery situation or a greenhouse are often a better thing to do than to use the soil out of your garden to start your seeds. So choosing transplants, I know we all go to the nursery and we kind of look at the plants, and we usually pick the ones that look the biggest and the healthiest. And so you've innately been doing this, but just so you have a little reminder, the bigger and heavier transplants are ideal for planting. They recover quicker from transplant shock, and they will grow faster. So you just kind of want to make sure that they're not too root bound in the whatever pot that you're getting. But yes, you do want a plant that's going to be not spindly and falling over, one that's healthier and looks better, of course. Planting them. So installing your transplants in the garden soil, that you want to put the whatever container you're taking them out of, whether it's a plastic tray or an individual little 4-inch pot, whatever it is, you want to make sure that when you're digging into the soil that you're putting them in, that the level of where the soil was on that transplant is now where you're planting them in the ground or raised bed or wherever you're putting them. Exception being tomatoes, which in that case, you actually can snip off some of the lower lying branches and plant those a little deeper. Watering transplants. So of course, obviously you want to water them as soon as you plant them. Some people like to soak the hole that they're putting them in. I'm one of those. I don't always choose to plant after it's rained recently. So sometimes I'll go out there and I'll let the water soak into the hole first. And when that's nice and wet, then I stick my transplant in there, backfill it in a little depression, and then I'll water a little bit more. So having the roots and the soil close together will help prevent transplant shock. So just know that it's a good idea to water after you've just recently transplanted. Potting soil. So the first year that you will choose to do a transplant, if you're growing your own seeds, probably not going to be a problem. It's the subsequent years. So having some type of a potting soil that's sterilized means that you can, I guess, be more confident in knowing that you're not spreading viruses or bacterial issues or fungal issues or anything like that, because that always has a nasty habit of working its way into your garden. So if you go out into your yard and you dig a hole and you take that soil and you use it, your seedlings may be at a disadvantage from the start. But if you purchase a potting mix that's sterile media, and you'll know that you're starting from scratch and your plants won't have to worry about a fungal issue or anything from the start. You can also make your own. So as I mentioned before with the soil triangle, when you had a loamy, sandy, clay type mixture where you have a good rich organic matter, sand and clay mixture, you can also purchase that in vermiculite, make your own, and then you just have a much larger volume of it. And some people choose to do that if they're going to be doing a lot of transplants. It's just an option. Peat pots. So peat pots are good growing containers because they're pretty cheap to source. You can cut the sides and direct the transplant in the ground, and you can kind of rip them apart if they're wet, and they work really well. And you can also make your own with newspaper. You can see some of these little contraptions on Amazon and all. Sometimes they work well, sometimes not so much, but if you're trying to be environmentally conscious, it's a good option. And advantages of DIY. So obviously homegrown transplants, you can choose the variety of the vegetable you want, and you're not stuck with whatever the nursery or the big box store wants you to buy. And you can pick a lot of the heirloom seeds and things that may not be out there except in particular locations. You can get stuff on Etsy, Amazon, eBay, a lot of good heirloom seeds there that maybe you're not able to find in the local stores. Cold frames, I'm going to try to zoom along a little bit. I notice we're over 7 o'clock. I like to talk sometimes. Cold frames, this is a good thing to use in fall and winter because on sunny, nice days, you can prop it open and allow the nice weather, the plants access to the nice weather. And then if you're going to have a couple freezing days, then you can shut it and you don't have to worry as much. Same things with high tunnels. Those are a good option too. Lots more expensive and more difficult to make, but some of the community gardens around here do have high tunnel access. So if you're interested in seeing how those work, you can take a look. And so just a couple bits of information. If temperatures are too low, you're going to get stunting. Your plants won't be growing very well. And if temperatures are too high, you'll get stretching or they'll be growing too tall. Proper temperatures for seed germination are often higher than proper temperatures for growing. So a lot of times you would want it to be super warm in there to get those seeds to germinate. And then after that, it's not as important that those temperatures are as high. And so as soon as your seeds germinate, you can move them to a cooler area. So if you've been using some type of a grow light, you can move that grow light away from them. So instead of having them an inch or two above, you can move that up a little bit higher. Same thing in a cold frame, you would prop it open to allow for additional ventilation. Mulch. I mentioned before, organic mulches supply great organic matter and as they decompose, so they can provide nutrients, but please don't think that that is the only type of fertilizer you need. You do need other types of nutrients in there for the plants. It's only one part of what I would consider fertilizer. They tend to cool the soil and can also delay maturity on early crops. So just keep an idea about that. They can keep soil temperatures lower because it's an additional layer on the soil. So you can kind of solve that problem by just waiting to apply it until after the soil warms a little bit more. And initially you want to put organic mulches at about 4 inches deep and then kind of take a look at it on a yearly basis to see if that works. I know some of you who are in the Master Gardener class today, Josh Footer was there from Cherokee County, and he was talking about mulches and how at his house he dumps a load of wood chips every year on some planting beds that he has, and that's helped to keep the weeds down, and it also gives back to the organic matter of the soil. So it's a win-win, and it's free. So green manure or cover crops, a couple of things here. One, it can help with prevention of breaking down of that organic matter, because you've got to cover over the soil so the UV light doesn't hit it as much. Some of these different types are like crimson clover, vetch, annual rye, not perennial, wheat, southern pea, soybean, millet, Sudan grass, winter legumes, summer legumes. And just of note, so vetches and clovers are nitrogen fixers the same way that the beans are. And that will actually put nitrogen, it'll take it from the air and return it to the soil. So another thing that we haven't gone in here is crop rotation. That would be in some other types of talks I would be giving. But you can grow beans in one part of your garden 1 year and then rotate out and put a heavy feeder, something that uses a lot of nitrogen in that area. It's just an option and helps you from having to spend a lot of money on fertilizer. And here you can see that the green crops can be used in a greenhouse. The cover crops can be used in a greenhouse as well. All right, just a few slides on garden pests in the fall garden. So here's some of what you might see. So a cross-striped cabbage worm, cabbage loopers. You still do get some moths that flit around on warm days. And a lot of people think, especially if you're not from Georgia and maybe you're new to the area, from an area that's a little cooler in the wintertime, but we'll have beautiful sunny 70, almost 80-degree days in the middle of January. And so you'll actually see a lot of insects that are out and about, and those can be honeybees or some bumblebees and other pollinators. You'll see moths out as well. So they're out there kind of doing their thing, and before you know it, they've munched on your head of cabbage. So some people will put row covers over as their plants are growing to help protect and keep the insects out. That's an option. I don't have that here in the presentation, but there are different techniques. But you can also use something that's a biopesticide, and that is BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis. Try to say that fast 5 or 6 times. Guarantee you won't be able to do it. I get tongue-tied every time I try. But BT is a natural organic type of bacteria. And here you have thuricide or dipel dust. And this is what's in mosquito dunks. But basically the premise of how this works is you apply this to your brassicas, like your cabbage or whatever, anything you would have a caterpillar that would prey on it. And that little bugger goes along and it eats the bacteria. That bacteria gets down into its gut, and then it starts to multiply. And before you know it, that caterpillar is DOA. So it's very safe. You can eat it and you don't have to worry about it. It does not do the same to humans or animals or anything else. But it is very deadly for caterpillars. It works very well. And there are different types of BT that work for different types of insect larvae. So like fungus gnats, if you have any of fungus gnats in your house plants, this actually works fairly well on those, just as an aside. Cabbage aphids. So you'll probably have some of these. I know they're a problem in warm season plants and in ornamentals. And you can use things called insecticidal soaps. So these are contact killers. Basically, they smother them and they can't breathe. It's just kind of a fancy soap. And there are recipes out there online that you can get to make it yourself. But to me, it's just simpler to purchase a bottle off the shelf and use that. And then we're basically done. So here we just have a shot of the Bonnie Plants facility greenhouse in Alabama, and you can see it looks like they're growing little pepper plants. And here's a production farm down in South Georgia, or it could be your vegetable garden in anywhere Georgia. So with that, I am all done. And I'm going to look here. I don't see anything in the chat box, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything. But if you have questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you don't want to talk or you can't, you can put that in the chat box and I will answer that. And that goes for I've got, let's see, what time is it? 7:11. So I ran a little bit long, but if anybody has any questions about the presentation, I can answer those. And if you have a quick question about anything else extension ag related, I can try to answer that as well. General timing for planting fall crops. So I mentioned that, and probably anytime, sometimes people will do towards the end of August, all the way through mid to almost maybe end of September. Parsnips in Georgia. Personally, not locally. Maybe more so up in the northern part of the state, but it could just be that we don't really have a lot of folks that like parsnips in the area. But I wouldn't say if you want them to try them, I would say definitely give it a go and let me know. Surely there's more information. And like I said, I'm open if you have questions about nuisance wildlife. Extension has a ton of different informational presentations that are out there. Some of you may have come previously when we had Tim Daly, who was our ag agent. Tim has since moved on to Henry County and is down there now. So I'm kind of finishing up the presentations that he had scheduled through the end of the year. I will be scheduling a whole new batch come January, and we'll be integrating some additional new subjects in. We'll be having backyard flocks. We'll have a poultry expert from UGA come on and talk about backyard flocks. It will have a pond management workshop in the middle of the day out at Tribble Mill Lake. That's actually Tribble Mill Park and Ozora Lake. And that will be kind of a hands-on, not for folks that are watching, but we'll have a specialist from UGA come and show us how to do some pond management type stuff so you can kind of see. And we're trying to come up with some other interesting ideas. So if you have subject matter that you would like to see as a presentation, you can feel free to put that in the chat box as well, or reach out to me at Lisa Klein at UGA .edu or at my Gwinnett County one, which would be lisa.klein at GwinnettCounty, all one word.com. And that's basically it. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate the large group of folks that I had that that showed up. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the evening. Bye.